But I'm starting to think that this idea of circumlocution is the key. Maybe we can talk around God when we can't talk about Him. Maybe we can lead people towards Christ when we can't lead people to Him. Hey guys, I'm Bill Westers, and this is the Encountering Truth podcast. Welcome to the Encountering Truth podcast, where we examine the evidence for Christianity, engage culture with kindness and conviction, and encounter Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. Well, I've just returned from the Cross-Examined Instructors Academy, led by the great Frank Turek, held in Charlotte, North Carolina this year. And it is an incredible apologetics training conference where we learn to improve our apologetics and presentation skills with some other great apologists there to give us advice, encourage us, and give us some feedback on our presentations. So I figured a great way to use that would be to just base this episode and probably the next episode on some of the presentations that I gave while I was down at CIA, the Cross-Examined Instructors Academy. So if you ever get a chance to go to the Cross-Examined Instructor Academy, I highly recommend it. It's an incredible opportunity. I get to make a whole lot of connections with the other great apologists, some of whom you've seen on this podcast before, but it is top-notch. So let's dive into it. Let's begin with a game of taboo. Now, I don't have the cards here, but you can imagine what you've all probably played the game of taboo, where you have cards that have a word on it that you're supposed to get your teammates to guess, but you can't say the several words on that card as clues to the word that you're trying to get them to guess. So this first one is a mythical character who wants to become a real boy, and the moral of the story is to tell the truth, or it might show up on a particular part of your face. Okay? If you guessed Pinocchio, you would be right. All right. The next one is as a teacher, at the end of a chapter or a unit, I might want to assess what my students have learned. So I would give them one of these, and they're oftentimes standardized. So, and if you guessed a test for that, you would be right on. Okay, and finally, earlier this summer, I brought my students to France and Spain. And when we got off the plane in France, in Paris, we had to go through customs and present this documentation with our photo on it. That would be a passport, right? Well, this game is actually an example of a skill that I have to teach my world language students. This skill is called circumlocution. Now, the dictionary definition of circumlocution is the use of an unnecessarily large number of words to express an idea or evasion in speech. But it really comes from that circum meaning around, locution meaning speaking. So it's talking around an idea. So if it's in French or Spanish and one of my students don't know a word, rather than giving them that word, I would encourage them to talk around the word in order to communicate the idea of what they're trying to say. Now, in this game, those three cards were hand-picked, right? Pinocchio, test, passport, and some of the words that I couldn't say for Pinocchio were nose and grow, wooden, lie, and puppet. For test, of course, you can't say exam, you can't say quiz or SAT or school even. And then for passport, you can't say travel or visa or country or identification and so on. Okay? But there are two other real words in the game of taboo, at least the copy that I have, and they are the Bible and the devil. Could you talk about the Bible without saying testament, book, swear, scriptures, or holy? Could you talk about the devil without saying Satan, Lucifer, hell, pitchfork, or angel? And then finally, what if one of the cards was God? Would you be able to talk about God without mentioning Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, Father, Savior, Lord, or Christianity? Well, as a high school teacher, a Christian teacher in a public school, this is something that I think about a lot. In fact, there's many people out there like me that are in a position where they can't share openly about their faith. But I'm starting to think that this idea of circumlocution is the key. Maybe we can talk around God when we can't talk about him. Maybe we can lead people towards Christ when we can't lead people to him. And so in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus tells the parable of the sower. And he talks about the soil where the seeds of the gospel fell, whether that's along the road, on the rocky ground, among the thorns. And then he goes on to talk about the good soil. This is the one who hears the word and understands it and then bears fruit. So maybe when we are in a position where we can't actually share the seeds of the gospel, maybe we can do a little pre-work, a little gardening, a little preparing of the soil so that we can make it good soil. So when they do hear the words of the gospel, the seeds of the gospel fall on their hearts, that it lands in that good soil and it can take root and bear fruit. This is the essence of what Francis Schaeffer calls pre-evangelism. He says that before a man is ready to become a Christian, he must have a proper understanding of the truth. We are concerned at this point not with the content of truth so much as with the concept of what truth is. So where do we begin? Well, in a postmodern world where relativism rules and the mantra of the day is to live your truth, well, maybe one of the most important things that we could ask is, as Pontius Pilate did so many years ago, what is truth? Now, this is actually a fairly easy and safe question that I could even ask my students. And so we're going to start with this idea of what is truth, and we're going to kind of play this out to see what this might look like in an actual scenario. Okay, so if I had my wallet and I said I have a $20 bill in my wallet, would that be true? Well, I believe you might say, I don't know. Well, I believe I have a $20 bill. Don't you believe me? Well, does believing it make it true? Of course not. What makes it true? The actual existence of a $20 bill in my wallet. This is called the correspondence theory of truth, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, but it's truth is that which aligns with or corresponds to reality. And so in order for a statement to be true, there must be a truth maker that determines its truth. And so if in a subjective truth claim, the truth maker is in the mind of the subject. Okay, so a statement like I like pizza can become untrue simply by me changing my mind about it. But that's not the type of truth claim that we're talking about here, is it? If it were, then I could just change my mind about what was in my wallet and I could become rich. No, we are making an objective truth claim. And so the truth maker relies on the actual object, the existence of a $20 bill in my wallet. So even if I told you it were a $50 bill, that would still be an objective truth claim. It would just be a false objective truth claim. right? Because it's not a $50 bill, it's just a $20 bill. Okay? So that'd be wishful thinking, right? So as Doug Groteis says, a statement is never true simply because someone thinks it or utters it. We may be entitled to our own opinions, but we are not entitled to our own facts. Believing a statement is one thing, that statement being true is another. So that is the difference between subjective and objective truth. Objective being true or false, regardless of what anybody thinks about it. Okay? So the next question is, can we actually know objective truth? Well, before we dive into that, we have to understand we should not confuse our desire for absolute certainty with the simple ability to be able to know something. Okay? For instance, when you get on a plane and fly somewhere, are you absolutely certain that it's going to get you there? Are you absolutely certain that it's gone through the proper maintenance checks, that the pilot has been properly trained and gotten enough sleep and is sober? When you sit down in a chair, are you absolutely certain that it's going to hold you up or continue holding you up without collapsing underneath you? No. But the thing is that nobody walks through life needing absolute certainty in every area of life, right? In fact, we convict criminals all the time, not with absolute certainty, but beyond a reasonable doubt. We look at all the evidence and we make a rational, reasonable conclusion from that evidence. So let's apply this to something else, okay? Look at the building that you're in, okay? Does that building exist? Well, yes, of course it does, right? Okay, well, how do you know that? Well, maybe I'm in it, but it existed before you got there, right? And your rationality believed it enough, told you to believe it in order to go there, right? So the next question is, did that building just pop into existence out of thin air? Of course not. How do we know that? Well, because our rationality tells us that things don't just come into existence without a cause. So, what could have caused the building that you're in or looking at? Okay. Could nature have caused it? No, right? How do we know that? Well, because there's obviously an element of design to it. And so design needs a designer. Now, what would be the first thing that someone would need to do to design or build that building? Okay. Buy the land? Draw up the blueprints? No, actually, before all of that, they would have to choose to design and build that building. And to choose requires a mind, right? And that mind would have to be intelligent enough to design and build it. Okay, it would have to be powerful enough and have the ability to build it. Okay, you would need the space or the land to build it on, and the time to do it, and all of the materials, or at least some way to make it all, right? To obtain it. And so, how do we know all this? Well, we reason from effect the building itself and the design in the building back to the most logical, reasonable cause, which would be a designer or builder. Okay, so that's what science does all the time, isn't it? Reasoning from effect back to a logical cause. Okay, so the next question, does all knowledge come from science? Well, at first we say, well, yes, of course. That's how we know everything, right? But in a 1998 debate with Dr. Peter Atkins, philosopher William Lane Craig identified 5 things that science cannot account for, but that we are all rational enough to believe. Okay? Number 1 would be logical and mathematical truths. Science actually presupposes logic and math, so to use science to prove them would be arguing in a circle. Okay? Next would be metaphysical truths, like there are other minds out there besides my own, or that the external world exists, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age. Okay. Then he goes on to say that ethical beliefs about statements of value, like morals, cannot be proven by science. Science cannot account for them. You cannot use the scientific method to prove what the Nazis did was wrong, right? And then what about aesthetic judgments about beauty? Beauty itself is inaccessible by the scientific method. Okay? And then finally, science itself is loaded with unprovable assumptions, right? So now that might be the end of the class or the conversation that you might have with someone. But let's take a look at what we accomplished during that conversation. Okay, number one, we talked about the difference between subjective and objective truth, right? Where the truth maker lies in the object, not in the subject's mind. So it's true or false, regardless of what someone believes about it, that there is no my truth and your truth. There's only the truth. Okay? We also talked about how truth is knowable. Even without absolute certainty, truth is knowable. We can know the truth. Okay? And then we discussed the idea of reasoning from effect back to a logical cause. And we basically laid the groundwork for the Kalam cosmological argument, okay, which says that everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause. And we related all of that to the building, okay, and that is an argument for the existence of God. And finally, we talked about how not all truth comes from science. Okay? In the next class or conversation or whatever that we might have with people, we might bring up things like, why does math work? Where do human rights come from? We talked about that in one episode a while back. What makes something right or wrong? Can life come from non-life? Is the universe fine-tuned for human life? You can talk about, is DNA a coded message? Or we could even talk about, what is the meaning of life? Okay? These are all good and safe questions that we can broach with to kind of push people towards Christ, lead people towards Christ when we can't lead people to Christ. Now, some people might say, well, what does this have to do with evangelism, with leading people to Jesus? Well, as Francis Schaeffer says, all the cultural, intellectual, or philosophic material is not to be separated from leading people to Christ. He goes on to say that talking about metaphysics, morals, and epistemology is part of my evangelism. Okay? And he says that in The God Who Is There. So in those times when we feel like maybe we can't be the ones to actually plant the seeds of the gospel, maybe, like we said, we can do a little bit of pre-work, a little bit of gardening, preparing that soil, making good soil ready to hear the gospel, so that when they do hear the gospel, when that gospel seed falls on their hearts, that it falls on good soil, that it takes root, and that it sprouts up and bears fruit. So we might not be able to plant it ourselves, but we can certainly be part of the harvest. So all of this is great stuff to consider if you find yourself in a position where you might not be able to share openly about your faith, or if it's just a little bit uncomfortable for you to start talking outright about God. Start with these things, because there are so many false truths in people's minds today. Like, people might accept Christianity, why can't all religions be true? Well, because they make contradictory claims that, one religion says that Jesus is not the Son of God, the other says he is. They can't both be true. Okay? Islam says that Jesus did not die on the cross. Christianity says that he did. They cannot both be true. All roads do not lead to heaven. Okay? Jesus says that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through me. So there's all sorts of false ideas out there, like the idea that we can't know the truth. A lot of people think that it's arrogant to claim that you can actually know objective truth. Okay? Well, we explain that we don't need absolute certainty in any area of life. We look at all the evidence and come to the most reasonable, rational conclusion from the evidence. Okay? And so it's really good to be able to correct people's thinking and thoughts towards this stuff and to help guide them, because all of these false ideologies and false assumptions underlying their worldviews really become an obstacle and a barrier to them coming to Christ. Okay? Even things like what their idea of tolerance is. Do you know that many people don't even think about what the word tolerance means? A lot of people think tolerance is just people have to agree with me. No, tolerance requires disagreement. You don't tolerate someone that you agree with, right? You just agree with them, you get along with them. No, tolerance means that you disagree, but you put up with them anyways. You allow that disagreement. We agree to disagree. Okay? So many people think that if you disagree with me, then you're being intolerant. Well, that's just nonsense. Okay? So these types of things you can talk about safely and kind of help people have better logic, better rationality, and reason through things a lot better in order so that they can actually be more open and understand that there is objective morality, there is knowable objective truth, and so on. So these things can help you share the gospel without sharing the gospel. Talking around God when you can't talk about God. Leading people towards Christ when you can't lead them to Christ. So, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure you click subscribe, leave us a good rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and make sure to share it on social media, share it with your friends, and of course, visit our website and our Facebook page. Our website is encounteringtruth.org. We'd love to hear from you. Let me know if there's anything else that you think of that could be great ways to share the gospel when you're not actually able to speak openly about the gospel. Any ideas, any concepts, any topics that you can talk about safely in those situations. So remember, as always, we make it our goal to examine the evidence, engage culture, and encounter Jesus. God bless. We'll see you next time.